Below is the full English adaptation tailored specifically for American audiences. It preserves the documentary tone, tension structure, and narrative pacing of the original text, but reshapes the language, rhythm, and framing to match U.S. viewer expectations, political literacy, and storytelling habits. This version is written for YouTube narration. No emojis. No stylized punctuation. Natural American English. Clear structure. Cinematic pacing. Someone once said democracy is the safest system ever invented. But what happens when a sitting president sends troops to surround the legislature in the middle of the night? What happens when a nationwide martial law order lasts only 6 hours, yet pushes an entire country to the edge? What happens when that president is later sentenced to life in prison? This is not fiction. This is not a political thriller. This is what happened in South Korea. And this is the story of the most severe stress test modern Korean democracy has ever faced. Welcome to The Bottom Line. Tonight, we walk into the 6 hours that changed a nation. It began on an ordinary winter night in Seoul. The streets were quiet. Cafes were closing. Television stations were airing routine programming. Nothing suggested history was about to turn. Then, at 10:30 p.m., the broadcast changed. President Yoon Seok-yeol appeared on national television. His tone was calm. His words were not. He declared nationwide martial law. In a country that had not seen such a move in decades, those two words hit like a shockwave. Martial law. In the United States, that phrase carries constitutional debate. In South Korea, it carries memory. Heavy memory. For older generations, martial law is not theory. It is lived experience. In 1979 and 1980, during the military-backed rule that followed political upheaval, martial law meant soldiers in the streets, media blackouts, shuttered universities, mass arrests, and the violent suppression of dissent. It meant tanks. It meant curfews. It meant fear. Those scars never fully disappeared. So when the word resurfaced in 2024, it did not land as policy. It landed as trauma. A 25-year-old Seoul resident later said through tears, "I never thought I would see martial law in 21st century Korea." That reaction said more than any headline could. Was this sudden? Not exactly. Behind that late-night declaration was months of escalating political tension. President Yoon had been under intense pressure. His legislative agenda was stalled. The opposition-controlled National Assembly had blocked multiple initiatives. Impeachment motions had been discussed openly. Public approval ratings were sliding. Trust between the presidency and parts of the security apparatus appeared strained. This was not one dramatic explosion. It was friction building inside a divided system. When institutions grow polarized, when executive power feels cornered, when public trust erodes, small sparks can ignite large fires. The martial law decree was that spark. Within minutes, the situation escalated. Military units were mobilized. Armored vehicles appeared near key government buildings. Police lines tightened around the National Assembly. Reports indicated that the primary objective was to secure the legislature and prevent lawmakers from convening. In other words, the executive branch moved to freeze the legislative branch. In any constitutional democracy, that is seismic. But what happened next was even more extraordinary. Lawmakers rushed to the assembly building. In a dramatic emergency session, more than 190 of the 300 members voted to reject the martial law order. The vote happened within hours of the declaration. The world watched in real time. A president invoked emergency authority. The legislature overturned it the same night. For 6 hours, South Korea stood at a constitutional crossroads. Then the order collapsed. Outside, thousands gathered. Some held candles. Some shouted. Some simply stood in stunned silence. Television coverage ran through the night. Social media flooded with live streams, analysis, and disbelief. One post captured the mood. "I thought politics was abstract. Now we are living inside history." That feeling was widespread. This was not distant governance. This was power, raw and immediate. The 6 hours ended. The consequences did not. 11 days later, on December 14th, the National Assembly passed an impeachment motion against President Yoon with an overwhelming majority. For the first time in Korean history, a sitting president was impeached for overreaching emergency authority. The process moved to the Constitutional Court. Months of hearings followed. Arguments centered on constitutional boundaries, emergency powers, executive intent, and the definition of insurrection. On April 4, 2025, the Constitutional Court unanimously upheld the impeachment. Seok-yeol was formally removed from office. That ruling alone marked a defining institutional moment. It demonstrated that even the head of state was not beyond constitutional limits. But the story did not stop there. Criminal proceedings followed. Prosecutors charged Yoon under statutes related to insurrection and abuse of authority. The allegations were serious. They argued that he had ordered military and police forces to obstruct legislative functions, detain political opponents, and attempt to consolidate unchecked power. On February 19, 2026, the Seoul Central District Court sentenced him to life imprisonment. The court stopped short of imposing the death penalty, which prosecutors had reportedly sought, citing the severity of the constitutional breach but noting that mass civilian casualties had not occurred. Several senior officials involved in executing the martial law order also received lengthy prison sentences. The message from the judiciary was clear. Institutional lines matter, even in crisis, especially in crisis. But legal closure did not mean social unity. Outside the courthouse, supporters and critics clashed in heated demonstrations. For some, the ruling was a triumph of democratic resilience. For others, it was political retribution disguised as justice. Polling revealed deep generational and regional divides. Some believed harsh punishment was necessary to protect constitutional order. Others believed the prosecution itself reflected partisan escalation. South Korea emerged not just shaken, but divided. More divided than at any point in recent memory. International observers watched closely. South Korea is not a peripheral state. It is the fourth largest economy in Asia, a major technology exporter, a key U.S. ally, a strategic node in the Indo-Pacific balance of power. Political instability there carries regional implications. Global media framed the episode as both a warning and a case study. A warning about how quickly democratic norms can be strained. A case study in how institutional checks can still function under pressure. Scholars described it as a new phase in Korean democracy, not merely elections deciding leadership, but courts and constitutional safeguards actively shaping the outcome of political crisis. There are broader lessons here. Power can be tested overnight. Institutions are not self-sustaining. Collective memory shapes political reaction. Democracy is not static. It is a constant negotiation between authority and accountability. South Korea did not collapse, but it did reveal its fault lines. And once exposed, fault lines do not simply disappear. They remain, waiting. If you think this story ends with a verdict, it does not. History does not pause after a gavel falls. Power is always probing its limits. Institutions are always under pressure. The night Seoul went dark under emergency order was not just a national event. It was a reminder. Every democracy, no matter how stable, carries stress points. The question is not whether they will be tested. The question is how they respond when they are. On this channel, we do not chase headlines. We break down the structures underneath them, because what matters is not just what happened, but how it was possible, and what it means next. This was one round. The next one is already unfolding, and the cards are still on the table.